I always believed that Leah and I were the kind of couple people envied. We met at a coffee shop of all places. She was rehearsing for a job interview, papers spread across the table, her brow furrowed in concentration. I was in line for my third espresso of the day. Tax season, you know? Something about her caught my eye, and before I could think twice, I walked over and offered to quiz her. She laughed, and from that moment, I was hooked. We moved fast, but it felt natural, like the universe had finally lined up just right. Within a year, we were married, standing under a canopy of twinkling lights with our closest friends and family cheering us on. I was the dependable CPA with a knack for numbers and a steady routine. Leah, on the other hand, was the paralegal who could light up any room with her sharp wit and infectious energy. We were opposites in so many ways, but we complemented each other. Or so I thought. Our early days were good. No, they were great. We had our small apartment downtown, filled with mismatched furniture and big dreams. We talked about the future constantly. Kids? Maybe 2, maybe 3. A house in the suburbs? Definitely, but not before we traveled a little. Paris was at the top of her list. Tokyo was mine. We even had a jar where we'd drop spare change, labeling it the Adventure Fund. I remember how Leah used to look at me during those days. Her eyes would crinkle at the corners, and she'd smile like I was her whole world. I felt lucky, like I'd hit the jackpot without even buying a ticket. We weren't perfect, of course. No one is. We argued about silly things. Who left the milk out? Whose turn it was to do the dishes? But it was always resolved quickly. At least that's how it seemed. But looking back, maybe I missed the signs. Maybe I was so caught up in the idea of us being the perfect couple that I ignored the tiny cracks forming beneath the surface. Her late nights at the office, the way she started scrolling through her phone with the screen tilted away from me, the vague explanations when she had to cancel plans last minute. At the time, I chalked it up to her job. Being a paralegal was demanding, and Leah always had big aspirations. I wanted to support her, to be the steady anchor she could rely on. In hindsight, I think I was too trusting, too naive. But isn't that what love is supposed to be? Trusting someone completely, even when it feels risky? I never thought for a second that Leah would betray that trust. I thought we were solid, unbreakable. It's funny how life has a way of humbling you, isn't it? I didn't realize it then, but those little cracks were about to widen into chasms. And once the foundation starts to crumble, there's no going back. Looking back, it didn't happen all at once. If it had, maybe I would have noticed sooner. Maybe I would have asked harder questions or refused to brush off her vague answers. But life doesn't always hand you clarity on a silver platter, does it? No, it creeps in quietly, slipping through the cracks while you're busy believing everything is fine. After our 4th anniversary, Leah started changing in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. At first, it was little things. She stopped waiting up for me when I worked late, claiming she was just too tired. Her hugs felt shorter, her laughter less frequent. But when I asked her about it, she waved it off, saying work was piling up and she was stressed. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Stress makes us all a little distant, right? Then came the late-night outings. Just a quick drink with friends, she'd say as she kissed me on the cheek and headed out the door. I didn't think much of it at first. Leah was always social, and I trusted her completely. But then the outings became more frequent, and her returns later. When I asked who she was with, her answers became slippery. Names I didn't recognize, friends she'd never mentioned before. I remember one night vividly. She came home smelling of expensive perfume, something too floral, too unlike her usual understated scents. Her hair was messy, her makeup smudged. When I asked if she'd had fun, she shrugged, muttering something about a boring conversation and how I wouldn't have enjoyed it anyway. I didn't push. Maybe I should have. But the inconsistencies started to pile up. One evening, she told me she was meeting a friend named Clara. A week later, in an offhand comment, she mentioned Clara had moved out of state months ago. I let it slide, but something gnawed at me. When I brought it up later, she laughed, accusing me of overthinking. I said Clara's visiting, not that she lives here, she quipped, brushing me off like I was a paranoid husband from some cliché drama. Her phone became another red flag. Leah had always been attached to her phone. It was practically an extension of her hand. But now, she kept it on silent and flipped face down whenever we were together. If it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, her smile tight, then shove it back into her pocket. Once, while she was in the shower, I glanced at her screen out of sheer curiosity. A text from someone named R. Nothing incriminating, just a, "See you soon." But it left a sour taste in my mouth. The tension between us grew. I tried to talk to her, but every conversation ended with her dismissing my concerns. "You're imagining things," she'd say, or, "Can we not do this right now? I've had a long day." And I would drop it because the last thing I wanted was to push her further away. I told myself it was just a rough patch, the kind all couples go through. But it wasn't just the late nights or the phone. It was the way she started avoiding me in the little moments that used to mean everything. The way she stopped asking about my day, stopped laughing at my dumb jokes. The way her smile, once so genuine, now felt like a mask. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, like I was living with someone I barely recognized. But without proof, what could I do? Accuse her of something I couldn't even name? I loved Leah. I didn't want to believe she could hurt me. So I buried my doubts and tried to carry on. I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I could feel the ground shifting beneath me, the cracks widening into something I couldn't ignore. I didn't expect the truth to hit me so hard, but maybe that's because I wasn't ready to face it. For months, I'd been telling myself that Leah's behavior was just a phase, a rough patch in our marriage, something we could work through. But the night of her company's holiday party shattered that illusion. Leah had been distant leading up to the event, brushing off my questions about her plans. "It's just a casual thing," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "You don't need to come if you're busy." But I wasn't busy, and I wasn't about to let another night slip by without trying to reconnect. So I insisted. I told her I wanted to support her and spend time with her coworkers. She relented, though her enthusiasm was lukewarm at best. The party was held at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place with dim lighting and overpriced cocktails. Leah looked stunning in her black dress, her hair cascading down her back in loose waves. For a moment, I let myself believe that everything would be okay, that maybe, just maybe, this night would bring us closer. But as soon as we walked through the door, it was clear Leah had other plans. She barely acknowledged me, flitting from one group of colleagues to the next, her laughter loud and carefree. I tried to keep up, but she moved through the room like a ghost, slipping away every time I approached. And then there was the way she looked at them, the men in particular. Her smiles lingered too long, her touches too familiar. It wasn't just in my head. I could see it in the way they looked back at her, like they knew something I didn't. By the time dessert was served, I'd had enough. I excused myself to get some air, my chest tight with frustration and hurt. I stood outside, staring at the city lights, trying to make sense of the growing knot in my stomach. That's when my phone buzzed. An email. No subject line, no sender I recognized. Just 2 words in the body. Check this. Attached was a folder of images and screenshots. At first I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the file. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, got the better of me. I opened it, and my heart stopped. There she was. Leah. My wife. In photo after photo, she was wrapped around another man, laughing, kissing, holding him in ways she hadn't held me in months. There were texts, too, messages that made my stomach churn. Plans to meet at hotels, confessions of love, jokes at my expense. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the evidence, each new piece a dagger to my chest. I don't remember how long I stood there staring at my phone. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to blur, my mind racing with disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. When I finally looked up, Leah was standing in the doorway, her smile faltering when she saw my expression. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I wanted to confront her right then and there to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I shoved my phone into my pocket and walked past her, mumbling something about not feeling well. She didn't follow me. Maybe she didn't care. Or maybe she knew exactly what I'd seen. When I got home, I sat in the dark, replaying every moment of our marriage in my head. How had it come to this? How had I missed the signs? The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd built my life with, had been lying to me, betraying me. And now, I had proof. It wasn't just the infidelity that hurt. It was the way she'd made a fool of me. The way she'd taken my trust and shattered it without a second thought. I felt like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to fight to stay upright or let myself fall. When you think betrayal can't get any worse, life has a way of proving you wrong. I thought Leah's infidelity was the final blow, the ultimate crack that would shatter our marriage. But what I discovered next made her cheating feel like just the tip of the iceberg. It started with a phone call. Not from Leah. She was busy pretending everything was fine. But from a woman named Tessa. I almost didn't pick up. Unknown numbers weren't my thing, especially in the middle of everything I was dealing with. But something told me to answer, and I'm glad I did. "Ethan Carter?" the voice on the other end asked. There was something urgent about her tone, something that told me this wasn't just another robocall. "Yes, who is this?" "This is Tessa, Mark's wife. I think we need to talk." Mark. The name clicked instantly. He was the man in the photos, the one Leah had been sneaking around with. I'd been so consumed by her betrayal that I hadn't thought much about him or what kind of person would willingly destroy someone else's marriage. Now, his wife was calling me. We met later that day at a quiet coffee shop across town. Tessa was everything Leah wasn't: reserved, thoughtful, and, above all, honest. She wasted no time getting to the point. "I know about Leah and Mark," she said, her eyes meeting mine with a mix of sympathy and determination. "I've known for weeks." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She sighed, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "I wanted to, but I didn't have proof until recently. And even then, I wasn't sure if you'd believe me." I leaned back, the weight of her words settling over me. "So, why now?" "Because it's bigger than an affair," she said, her voice lowering to a near whisper. "Mark and Leah, they're not just cheating, they're involved in something much worse." She slid a folder across the table, its contents as damning as the email I'd received at the party. Bank statements, legal documents, and a series of encrypted messages. It painted a picture far darker than I could have imagined. Leah and Mark weren't just lovers. They were partners in a scheme orchestrated by Leah's law firm. Together, they were extorting clients, falsifying evidence, and siphoning money from unsuspecting victims. "They've ruined lives," Tessa continued, her voice trembling. "People have lost their homes, their savings, everything. And Leah's been right in the middle of it." I couldn't breathe. The woman I'd shared my life with, the woman I'd trusted, was part of something so vile, so calculated, that it made my stomach turn. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to fully believe it. "There has to be some mistake," I said weakly. "Leah wouldn't—" "She would," Tessa interrupted. "And she has. My husband's just as guilty, but that doesn't change what Leah's done." The rest of our conversation was a blur. Tessa explained how she'd stumbled upon Mark's secret after finding suspicious transactions in their joint account. Her digging had led her to Leah, and from there, to the larger conspiracy. She'd risked everything to uncover the truth, knowing it could cost her more than just her marriage. By the time I left the coffee shop, my head was spinning. I wanted to confront Leah, to demand answers, but Tessa had convinced me to wait. "You need to protect yourself," she'd said. "Gather your evidence. If you confront her now, she'll deny everything and destroy any chance you have of stopping her." So I went home and began my own investigation. It wasn't easy. Leah had always been careful, but cracks were starting to show. Emails left open on her laptop, whispered phone calls behind closed doors. Piece by piece, I put it all together. The affair, the fraud, the lies. It was all connected. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each one revealing something worse than the last. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, some way this could all be a misunderstanding. But the evidence was undeniable. Leah wasn't just unfaithful, she was a criminal. And just like that, the woman I'd loved, the life we'd built together, became a stranger to me. I knew then that there was no saving our marriage. But this wasn't just about us anymore. It was about justice. It was about making sure Leah and everyone involved paid for what they'd done. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready to fight. They say the first step in winning a battle is knowing your enemy. Sitting in my living room, staring at the mountain of evidence against Leah and her law firm, I realized just how colossal my enemy was. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. It was about survival, justice, and making sure Leah didn't drag me down with her. The first thing I did was call an attorney. Not just any attorney, though. I needed someone sharp, relentless, and utterly unafraid to take on a law firm notorious for their dirty tactics. Enter Olivia Hayes. She came highly recommended by Tessa, who had already begun her own legal fight against Mark. Olivia was everything I wasn't at that moment: calm, confident, and in control. From the moment I walked into her office, I knew I was in good hands. "Ethan, you're in a precarious position," she said, her eyes scanning the documents I'd brought. "But you're also holding a goldmine of evidence. With the right strategy, we can not only protect you, but also expose Leah and the entire operation." Her words gave me hope, but they also made me realize how much was at stake. Leah wasn't just any paralegal. She was deeply entrenched in a firm with enough resources to bury people like me. Olivia didn't sugarcoat it. "They'll come after you," she warned. "They'll try to discredit you, intimidate you, maybe even threaten you. But if we stay ahead of them, they won't win." We got to work immediately. Olivia helped me initiate divorce proceedings, ensuring that every move we made was airtight. She also began building a case against Leah and the firm, leveraging the evidence Tessa and I had gathered. It was meticulous, exhausting work, tracking transactions, decoding encrypted messages, and piecing together the firm's web of deceit. Meanwhile, at home, I had to maintain the facade that everything was normal. Leah was still coming and going as if she hadn't turned my life into a nightmare. Her late nights continued, her phone always glued to her hand. Every time I saw her, a mix of anger and sadness churned in my chest. How could someone I'd loved so deeply, someone I'd shared my life with, betray me so completely? One night she came home late, her usual excuse ready on her lips. "Work ran over," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. I just nodded, forcing a smile, pretending I didn't know the truth. It was like living with a stranger who had no idea her carefully constructed world was about to come crashing down. But the hardest part was the waiting. Waiting for Olivia to finalize our strategy. Waiting for the right moment to confront Leah. Every day felt like an eternity. Every hour filled with the weight of what I now knew. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind was constantly racing, replaying our marriage like a film reel, searching for signs I'd missed. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just reacting to Leah's betrayal anymore. I was taking action. I was preparing for the fight of my life, and I was determined not to lose. Olivia's advice echoed in my mind. You have the truth on your side, Ethan. Use it. And I intended to. Leah had made her choices, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. But I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for myself. For the man I used to be before her, lies eroded my confidence and trust. The battle wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready. I had no choice but to be. Leah had underestimated me, and she was about to find out just how big of a mistake that was. The day I confronted Leah will forever be etched into my memory. It wasn't just the anger or the heartbreak. It was the clarity, the sharp realization that I had nothing left to lose by laying everything bare. For weeks, I'd kept my head down, quietly gathering evidence and preparing for this moment. Now, it was time. I chose a Friday evening. She couldn't use work as an excuse to leave, and I didn't want her walking out halfway through the conversation to meet friends. When she came through the door, I was already seated at the dining table. My laptop was open, files neatly arranged beside it. She froze for a moment, her hand still on the doorknob, then forced a smile. "Hey, Ethan," she said, her voice too casual. "What's all this? Another tax project?" "Sit down, Leah," I said, my voice steady. "We need to talk." Her smile faltered, and for a split second I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. But then she recovered, slipping into the role of the confident, untouchable woman she'd become over the past year. "Can this wait?" "I'm exhausted," she said, brushing past me toward the kitchen. "No," I said firmly, my tone leaving no room for argument. "It can't." She sighed dramatically, pouring herself a glass of wine before finally sitting across from me. "All right, Ethan. What's so important?" I reached for the folder, my heart pounding as I placed it in front of her. "This," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "It's everything. The affair, the fraud, the lies. You've left a trail a mile wide." Her expression didn't change at first. She stared at the folder, then back at me, her lips curving into a small, dismissive smile. "What is this? Some amateur detective work? Ethan, I don't have time for your games." "Open it," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Unless you'd prefer I email it to the police instead." That got her attention. Her hand trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. Photos, bank statements, emails. It was all there. The evidence was undeniable, and for the first time, Leah couldn't hide behind her excuses. When she looked up, her smile was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "So, what's your plan?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Expose me? Ruin my career? Do you really think you'll come out of this unscathed?" "I'm not the one who committed fraud," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not the one who betrayed my spouse and destroyed lives for money." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You have no idea what you're up against, Ethan. You think you can take on me, my firm? You're a CPA, not a hero." "I don't need to be a hero," I said, meeting her gaze. "I just need to be the man who finally stops you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with tension, the kind that makes your chest tight and your skin crawl. Then she leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "If you go through with this, I'll destroy you," she said, her voice low and venomous. "You think the firm will let you walk away unscathed? They'll come for you, Ethan. They'll ruin you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Her words were meant to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of determination. I'd spent months living in her shadow, letting her lies control my life. Not anymore. "Get out," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You heard me?" I said, standing. Pack your things and leave. You can threaten me all you want, but I'm done letting you manipulate me. You're not welcome here anymore." For a moment, I thought she might argue, might try to fight her way back into my good graces. But instead, she laughed, short, sharp, and bitter, before standing and grabbing her bag. "This isn't over," she said as she walked to the door. "You'll regret this, Ethan. Mark my words." The door slammed shut behind her, and for the first time in months, the house was silent. I stood there, letting the weight of the moment sink in. The confrontation was over, but the battle was just beginning. Leah had shown her true colors, and now it was up to me to make sure she faced the consequences. I wish I could tell you that Leah walking out of our house marked the end of it. That once the door slammed shut, so did the chaos she'd unleashed on my life. But if anything, it was only the beginning. The threats started almost immediately. The first came as a late-night call. I didn't recognize the number, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ethan Carter?" the voice on the other end asked, low and menacing. "You'd better back off. You're playing a dangerous game." I hung up without responding, but the message was clear. Leah's firm wasn't going to let me walk away quietly. Olivia had warned me this might happen. "They'll try to intimidate you," she'd said, her tone firm. "Stay the course. Don't engage." And so I didn't. But that didn't stop the escalation. Anonymous letters started showing up in my mailbox. Thinly veiled threats warning me to drop the divorce proceedings and forget what I knew. One even included a photo of me walking into Olivia's office as if to say, "We're watching." It was unnerving, sure, but it only fueled my resolve. These were people who thrived on fear, who relied on others folding under pressure. I wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Then, just as things seemed to reach a boiling point, the unthinkable happened. I was sitting in my living room, flipping through documents Olivia had sent over, when the news broke. A shooting at a bar downtown. At first, it seemed like a random act of violence. Tragic, but unrelated to my situation. Then I heard the name of the bar, the Monarch. The same bar Leah and Mark frequented. My stomach dropped as the details unfolded. The shooter, an ex-employee of Leah's firm, had targeted the bar during a private gathering, claiming he'd been ruined by the company's schemes. Leah was there that night, along with several senior partners. By the time the police arrived, the damage was done. 3 people were dead, several injured, and the city was in shock. Leah survived, but just barely. I found out through the news that she'd been rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound to her leg. For a moment, a fleeting, almost shameful moment, I felt relief. Not because she was hurt, but because it meant she was vulnerable. For the first time, she wouldn't be able to dodge the consequences of her actions. The shooting sent shockwaves through the firm. Whistleblowers came forward, exposing years of corruption, fraud, and extortion. The media latched onto the story, painting the firm as a den of snakes that had finally turned on itself. Arrests followed swiftly, with senior partners being hauled away in handcuffs. It was chaos, and Leah was right in the middle of it. I thought about reaching out to her, if only to hear her side of things, to see if she'd finally show some remorse. But what would be the point? Leah had made her choices, and I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her. Besides, I had my own battles to fight. The fallout wasn't just confined to Leah and her firm. My name was dragged into the headlines, my connection to Leah making me a subject of speculation. Reporters camped outside my house, shouting questions every time I stepped outside. My neighbors started looking at me differently, whispering behind my back. But amidst the chaos, there was a silver lining. The walls Leah had built around her secrets were crumbling, and the truth was finally coming to light. Olivia worked tirelessly to ensure that I was protected, keeping my name out of the legal crosshairs while building an airtight case for the divorce. The days were long, the nights even longer, but I held on to one thing: the knowledge that justice was finally catching up with Leah. She might have walked out of my house with her head held high, but now She was facing the reality of her actions. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The battle wasn't over, but the tide was starting to turn. It's strange how life can turn on a dime. One moment, you're clawing your way through the chaos, barely keeping your head above water. The next, you're standing on solid ground, watching the wreckage from a distance. That's how it felt the day Leah was served with divorce papers in her hospital room. I wasn't there to see it. Olivia had advised against it. "Let the system do its work," she said, her voice calm but firm. Still, I imagined the scene in vivid detail. Leah propped up in bed, her leg in a cast, the expression on her face shifting from disbelief to fury as the papers were handed to her. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was justice. And this was the first step. The shooting at the Monarch had been the catalyst for everything unraveling. In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Leah's firm expanded rapidly. Former clients came forward with harrowing stories of being extorted, manipulated, and left in financial ruin. Whistleblowers within the firm supplied damning evidence, implicating not just the senior partners, but also key players like Leah. She couldn't escape the net closing around her. The prosecutors were relentless, charging her with conspiracy to commit fraud, aiding and abetting extortion, and several counts of obstruction of justice. Olivia kept me updated on the proceedings, and while I tried to focus on rebuilding my life, I couldn't help but follow the news. The media was ruthless. Headlines splashed across every platform, detailing the firm's collapse and the arrests of its senior members. Leah's name appeared frequently, often alongside words like disgraced and scandal. I didn't revel in her downfall, but there was a grim satisfaction in knowing the truth was out there for everyone to see. The trial was a circus. Cameras lined the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions at anyone who walked by. I attended only one day, sitting quietly in the back, my presence unnoticed by Leah. Watching her in the defendant's seat was surreal. She looked small, almost fragile, a stark contrast to the confident, untouchable woman I'd once known. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Emails, financial records, and testimony from her co-conspirators painted a damning picture. The prosecutors didn't pull any punches, and neither did Olivia when she took the stand to present the documents we had gathered. By the time the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts, there was little doubt about Leah's fate. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The senior partners of the firm weren't so lucky. Most of them received life sentences for their roles in the larger schemes. The firm itself was dismantled, its assets seized and redistributed to compensate the victims. It was a small comfort, but it was something. Leah's incarceration marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For so long, my life had been consumed by her betrayal and the fallout that followed. Now, with the legal battles behind me, I could finally start to heal. Still, there were moments of reflection, moments when I wondered how things might have been different if Leah had made other choices. I wasn't naive enough to think our marriage could have been saved, but part of me mourned the life we'd planned together. The dreams we'd shared felt like relics from another world. But justice had been served, and that was what mattered most. Leah had faced the consequences of her actions, and I had emerged from the storm stronger than I ever thought possible. The weight I'd carried for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of clarity and purpose. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was mine to walk. For the first time in years, I felt free. After everything, I wasn't sure if I'd ever trust anyone again. Betrayal cuts deep, especially when it comes from someone you thought would be your partner for life. For a while, I avoided relationships altogether. It wasn't that I didn't want companionship, I just couldn't imagine opening myself up to that kind of pain again. That changed the day I met Sarah. I wasn't looking for anyone. In fact, I'd gone out of my way to avoid situations where I might meet someone new. But Sarah was different. We met at a community event, a fundraiser for veterans. She was running a booth for a nonprofit that provided support for ex-service members, and I'd been volunteering to help with logistics. From the moment we spoke, there was something about her that put me at ease. Sarah was warm, genuine, and completely unpretentious. She had a way of listening that made you feel like the most important person in the world, even if you were just rambling about the weather. It wasn't until later that I learned she was a former Marine. She'd served 2 tours overseas before returning home to focus on helping others. Her strength wasn't just physical. It was in the way she carried herself. The quiet confidence that came from knowing she'd faced some of life's toughest challenges and come out stronger on the other side. We started out as friends. She didn't push, didn't pry into my past. She seemed to understand that I needed time to figure things out for myself. Slowly, I found myself opening up to her, sharing pieces of my story I hadn't told anyone else. She listened without judgment, offering insight only when I asked for it. One day, over coffee, I finally told her everything. About Leah, the betrayal, the legal battles, and the scars I still carried. I braced myself for pity or discomfort, but Sarah didn't flinch. Instead, she looked me in the eye and said, "You've been through hell, Ethan. But you're still here. That says a lot about who you are." It was a turning point for me. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as a victim, but as someone capable of moving forward. Our friendship deepened into something more, though it wasn't without its challenges. I had walls up, and Sarah had her own past to contend with. Trust didn't come easily for either of us, but we were committed to building something real. We talked openly about our fears, our hopes, and the things we'd both learned the hard way. Sarah wasn't Leah, and that was exactly what I needed. She wasn't flashy or manipulative. She didn't play games or make me feel like I had to prove my worth. With Sarah, everything was straightforward, honest. She taught me that trust isn't about blind faith. It's about mutual respect and communication. It's about showing up for each other, even when it's hard. Slowly but surely, she helped me believe in the possibility of love again. We took our time, letting our relationship grow at its own pace. It wasn't about rushing into the future or recreating what I'd lost. It was about building something entirely new, something grounded in honesty and shared values. Sarah and I didn't talk much about the past, not because we were avoiding it, but because we were focused on the present, on the life we were creating together. I won't pretend the scars from my marriage disappeared overnight. They didn't. There were moments when doubt crept in, when the fear of being hurt again threatened to overshadow everything. But Sarah was patient, steady, and unwavering in her support. In time, those doubts faded. They didn't vanish completely, but they no longer controlled me. I learned to trust again, not just in Sarah but in myself, in my ability to choose wisely, to set boundaries, and to recognize red flags before they spiraled into something worse. Sarah became more than just a partner. She became my anchor, my safe harbor in a world that had once felt so unstable. Together, we found a rhythm, a balance that allowed us both to heal and grow. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Hopeful that love could be different, that it could be better. And with Sarah, it was. If you'd told me years ago, in the midst of all that chaos, that I'd one day find peace, true peace, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, it felt like my life was an endless storm, and I was a man stranded in the middle of it. But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? Sarah and I eventually decided to retire early. We'd both lived lives filled with stress and responsibility, and we figured it was time to focus on what really mattered. Living. Not just existing, but really living. So, we sold our house, packed up what little we needed, and bought a camper van. It was a crazy idea, but it was ours, and that made it perfect. Our plan was simple: travel across the country, see everything we'd missed while we were busy chasing careers and dealing with life's curveballs. We mapped out a loose itinerary, but the beauty of the road was in its unpredictability. Some days, we'd wake up with no idea where we'd end up by nightfall, And that was the best part. The journey wasn't just about the places we visited, though there were plenty of those. National parks, small towns, bustling cities. It was about the time we spent together, the conversations we had as the miles rolled by. We talked about everything and nothing, about the lives we'd lived and the future we were building. For the first time, I felt truly free, unburdened by the past. One of my favorite memories is of a night we spent under the stars in the middle of nowhere. Sarah had insisted we stop when she spotted a clearing just off the highway. We built a small fire, wrapped ourselves in blankets, and sat in silence, watching the sky. It was the kind of quiet that makes you realize just how noisy life can be. As we sat there, she turned to me and said, "You know, Ethan, we've come a long way." She wasn't just talking about the miles we'd traveled. She was talking about the journey we'd taken to get to this point, through betrayal, heartbreak, healing, and rebuilding. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Yeah," I said, "and I wouldn't change a thing." Because as much as the past had hurt, it had also shaped me. It had led me to Sarah, to this new life, to a version of myself I never thought I'd find again. The man who had once been broken by betrayal was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more at peace. We kept traveling, kept exploring. Along the way, we met people who reminded us of the beauty in humanity, despite all the darkness we'd seen. We shared meals, stories, and laughter with strangers who quickly became friends. Years passed, but the excitement of the road never faded. Every day was a new adventure, every stop a reminder of how far we'd come. We weren't running from the past. We were simply moving forward 1 mile at a time. Now, as I sit here writing this, the camper van parked by a quiet lake, I can't help but feel grateful. Grateful for the lessons I've learned, the love I've found, and the life I've built. Leah is a distant memory, a chapter long closed. I don't hold bitterness anymore. There's no room for it in a life filled with so much joy. Sarah and I don't know where we'll go next, and that's the beauty of it. The road is wide open, and so is the future. For the first time in years, I'm not looking back. I'm looking ahead, and I can't wait to see what's around the next bend.